Hey, today's topic is going to be about FaZe versus Astralis, or how FaZe had the edge over Astralis in the old iteration with Kerrigan, Alu, Kiyoshima, Nico, and Rain. And this is a topic I thought about since I was watching Counterpoints, and they're talking about why was it that FaZe had this advantage over Astralis. So I'll just throw my opinion out there. If you just look at their history together, they've played 3 times in Best of X series. Once at IM Katowice in the finals, once at Starladder Kiev in the finals, and once in the semifinals of IEM Sydney. And Katowice was a weird one just because FaZe got Nico within like days before the tournament started, and we're still able to get to the finals. But if you look at it, this is what happened. Game 1 on Cash, FaZe win, just barely. And then they won off of it because they had great playmakers on the T side, and then Kerrigan's calling was super decisive as to where he was trying to go, or what he was trying to do. Game 2 was overpass. FaZe just don't have the structure to run a T side overpass at the time. It was like days. Like you have to have like a plan of how you throw nades, who's supporting where, who's going where, how do you develop that map control in order to hit A. But if you don't do that, then then the other team will be like, oh, probably going B, because it's such a pain for most teams to go A, and overpass is like Astralis' best map. So that was an obvious win for Astralis. Nuke was kind of a weird one just because it took Astralis like a hero play to win that, but even if you just look at it, it seems very likely Astralis probably should have won that anyway, just because it takes structure, it takes time to build up a CT side for FaZe on that map, and their T side wasn't particularly impressive. I mean, they just come together, so I'm not like saying it should have been better, but it just felt like the experience was too much in Astralis' favor, and the same can be said for Game 4 when they played on Inferno. So clean 3-1. Maybe if FaZe got if like a play switched where like Dupree didn't kill everybody on Game 3 of Nuke, maybe FaZe could have squeaked in a second win, but like they already squeaked in one at Cash, so I feel like on average this is about what you should have expected. And so you look at it and you think, okay, so Astralis, super structured, had good players, had a pretty good T side as expected. I am Katowice. So what happens? What's the catalyst? What's the change for FaZe taking over, so to speak? Well, you go to Starladder Kiev and they play on Mirage, and FaZe actually call pretty good T side in Mirage, but Astralis also do. The difference between the two of them is I think Astralis' CT side was a bit better, whereas like FaZe, they didn't really have an answer for the stuff that Glaive was calling or what Glaive was doing, or how to like take control of the map. So I felt like that was a problem for them, and that's eventually why Astralis won that first map. Second map is a weird one. Nuke, basically Kiyoshima and Alu go off, and then they go off on the CT side, and then that's why FaZe win that map. Game 3 in Inferno is interesting, I guess, just because a lot of people have said this, and I do agree to some extent. I feel like the coordination of FaZe as a unit was better at IEM Katowice than subsequent tournaments, but their understanding of how to play together, the understanding of how the 5-man unit works, obviously increased over time, and this is where you get Inferno, and because their understanding as how to play Inferno was much better than it was at IM Katowice. So they destroyed the T side, and then they don't really have an answer for CT side. Basically, it came down to Nico, get this up, and we're going to pray to God that you get like 2 or 3 shots off. And then he eventually does it. But that's only enough to get them to overtime, and then they win that. And that's like one of those maps that could have gone either way. So FaZe just barely like win that, but overall I feel like they did play better as a team for that series. Go to IEM Sydney where they play in the semifinals. Game 1 is Kabul, and this is actually a caveat one, I guess, where you have to, because this was specifically a play within the play, or earlier on in that same tournament, Astralis played FaZe on Cobble, and they had the veto chicken game where like, no, you ban Cobble, no, you ban Cobble, no, you ban Cobble, and then they eventually both end up playing on Cobble where Charlotte's destroy FaZe, and then Kerrigan comes out and is like, don't worry, we were hiding strats. And it was like, this is bullshit. You are not hiding strats. But you have to give the tip of the hat to Kerrigan because it's pretty clear like the T side was definitely hiding something. Because if you look at the group stage game, basically all they did was just do like slow basic defaults and then go into a B split later on to the rifle rounds. Whereas in this game, the semifinals, they are much more focused on taking control of mid and long, and then mixing that up with B control and then hitting that. So it seems like they had a much more diverse playbook. They just weren't using it until the semifinals. At the same time, Glaive was right in the sense that FaZe are terrible on Cobble, especially their CT side. So it was super dangerous to play on this map, and they probably could have lost this one too if like Rain didn't save them on like their CT side with like a hero play basically. So there is that. So yeah, Kerrigan played a crazy fucking mind game that worked, but it was a dangerous mind game. And if this 5-man unit had stayed together, I wouldn't have been surprised if they did end up banning Cobble against Astralis if they did rematch, because that was a bit too dangerous. Game 2 nuke, basically Astralis destroy FaZe, I think, because basically this is an important map if you just think about it stylistically, because FaZe do what they always do in the sense that they put their best playmakers out there in specific map positions to make a play. So Nico or Rain, and they both like playing a yard, and then Astralis adapt to this. Astralis start playing more passive. Astralis like start getting like maybe they send out device out there to get a pick, but mostly they try to stay in their sights, try to control and limit where FaZe can go, and then kill them when they run in. So that's kind of how Astralis won the CT side. And then Astralis on the T side were like all over the place. Like basically it took entirety of map control, and then FaZe weren't able to deal with it because they weren't coordinated enough on the CT side. And Kiyoshima and Alu didn't go fucking crazy this time around. So they go to game 3. Game 3 was like train. It was pretty lackluster for Astralis, to be honest, but Kerrigan did call a really good T side, and basically like just destroyed them. There was like he was like mixing up all the various like tactics he could have done, and it was and Astralis didn't really have an answer, and then their own T side was very lackluster. So FaZe ended up winning this, and it's pretty clear at this point at IEM Sydney that FaZe have the advantage over Astralis. Now, what is it specifically across time that has made it so that FaZe has this advantage over Astralis? I think there's two specific factors. The first one, and I think the more important one, is that in terms of styles, I feel like Kerrigan's T-side calling is stylistically good against what CT side Astralis like to do. So what CT side Astralis like to do is they're very like conservative with their playmakers. So they mostly just use device on the op. That's like their preferred like priority, but maybe like a few other players can do it sometimes, but it's usually just device. And then on top of that, when the actual hit, before the actual hit comes in, they like to do like stacks. They like to gamble a bit. So for instance, they like to rotate a player from one side to another, stack that. So Inferno, like they leave one on B for an A. That's pretty standard, right? But they do it. They also did it on Mirage. They do it on like Overpass sometimes. They do it across. Obviously do it on Trade. Like do it across all their maps. And this is a problem, particularly against FaZe, because the way FaZe plays the game, or the way Kerrigan calls the game, is first off in his regular default, like he'll put his star players into like areas where it's like very dangerous to duel them, but they get a lot of information, so you can't just leave them there. At the same time, from that point onwards, like he's super decisive. Kerrigan is in terms of calling, as in like if some player gets a kill on one side of the map or the other, or some player dies or some player gets a specific information, he'll be like, okay, it's time to go, let's roll. Or if he's like perfectly set up to like for instance, do like an A split on Cash, but he gets the sense, like, or he gets a piece of information from the other side of the map that, oh, I think there's 4 players here, there's only 1 on B, and then there's like 20 seconds, people like, fuck it, everybody go B, everybody go B now, and everybody fucking follows him, so super fast. So that's like one of the reasons. The other reason is that he's his change of pace is like hard to read. So he can switch between slow and fast rounds all the time. And then finally, FaZe in particular does a lot of fakes. Well, more than usual, not a lot, but just more than usual. And that also plays into like why Kerrigan can run a bunch of T rounds on top of Astralis, like because that like hurts them in the sense like since Astralis is more prone to doing stacks, they might be more prone to losing to fakes, right? So I feel like just in terms of that, Kerrigan has an edge as a T side leader against Astralis, at least from what I saw from these three. At least from what I saw from this iteration of FaZe. And then the reason I think this is the case is just because if you look at the maps they've won across these 3 series, in particular, one map was won because of the CT side like rampaging. Just one. It was a nuke where Alu Kiyashima at Starladder Kiev like destroyed Astralis. Beyond that, a majority of FaZe wins. I won't say only because of T side, but I feel like the majority of the work is being done on the T side for FaZe. So there's like Cash in the first run round at IEM Katowice. There's Train at Sydney, Inferno Starladder Kiev, Cobble at Sydney, and even in like losses, I feel like their T side's been pretty decent against Astralis most of the time. So I feel like that's why you have to favor Kerrigan's just leadership and style as one of the defining factors as to why FaZe had this edge over Astralis. And then there's the other obvious one, and the fact that if just look at the player form from just these 3 tournaments and going onwards. I am Katowice. I don't think anybody in FaZe was a particular like weakness, but I feel like Astralis was at like close to their pinnacle. I am Katowice, so Device was still a superstar. Kirby was still awesome. Zitnix was the MVP of the tournament. Dupree played at an MVP level in the finals, and then you go forward. Each one of them starts dropping off more and more as we go forward. Whereas none of the FaZe players do that. So like Glaive was pretty weak at I am Katowice, and that continues on. Kirby's like role is Kirby consistency, I guess his consistent impact went down as well. Zitnix, I actually think Zitnix is still really good, but like the way he gets his impact kills is usually through clutches, and that's not really something you should be expecting most of the time. So it's not like it's kind of weird in that sense. Like you can't really expect it, but you kind of do just because it's Zitnix, but you really shouldn't expect it. And then the only player I feel like has gotten better technically has been Dupree. Whereas on FaZe's side, Nico, Rain, Kiyoshima, Alu, Kerrigan, each one of them have none of their forms have fallen off throughout the entire period. And finally, you have to consider how do I say this? You also have to consider the fact that basically these 2 particular players, Kerrigan and Kiyoshima, they're like the supportive base of FaZe, and what I mean by that is like there are a bunch of situations where you get into the small man situation, and it should favor Astralis, but Kiyoshima and Kerrigan within this like period of time were playing at a better level, and so even though I feel like the teamwork and coordination of Astralis is much better in these situations, FaZe got away with it just because those 2 players in particular were at a higher level than they were before, and just in these specific instances. So like even in an area where that should have edged towards Astralis, FaZe evened it out just because of the current player forms, like those 2 players. So in conclusion, if I had to like pick 2 factors as to why I thought FaZe had an edge over Astralis during that time, it's Kerrigan's T side like stylistic calling, and it's the form of the players over time. As for whether or not that'll continue, I have no clue. Nobody fucking knows how this FaZe lineup is going to work. Whether it's going to be loose or it's going to be structured or it's going to be even anything like this one. So we'll have to see at ESL New York. But even then, I feel like we're not going to see the real FaZe until 1 or 2 months from now. But this is something interesting to keep in mind if they do end up crossing paths, FaZe and Astralis at ESL New York. That starts tomorrow. See you then.